they've just let us use it. But churches have them though too, right? And they work with Texas Baptist Men. They buy their own and they work with Texas Baptist Men. Yeah, so that's one of the things is partnering with Texas Baptist Men and saying this is something we would build into our ministry. And then let's say there is a hurricane or something, in June, or maybe it's later than that, August or something like that. And we go, hey, we're going to go help out. And we hook that thing up and we go down and to New Orleans or Houston or something like that, and to a neighborhood there that just doesn't have electricity. It's not been wiped out. If they're wiped out, there's not much you can do there. Like those fires in California, if you took one of these units in, I don't know, they're going to start doing their own rebuilding and clearing out. It might be really helpful to have them there, but they can't live in those houses. They've been burned to the ground. But I think the big place where you see these shower and wash machine units is in places where the houses are damaged, some but not destroyed, livable, but no electricity. And I think there it's really helpful. In a place like Houston too, if you get a hurricane in May or June, it is hot, sweaty, and you have no electricity. Probably going and getting yourself a hot shower and getting your clothes washed would be a huge ministry to people. So, okay. But they're at various churches. The 15 units aren't all at one place. They're all over yeah. So joining in that world and saying we're going to be a bit of disaster relief, yeah. I don't know, maybe worth considering. That's what they do, right? They run off generators, Bill? Yeah. So it's a really cool ministry. It's a way to encourage people. Okay. Hey, maybe we can make enough money to buy one of these units selling off that clothes that someone left in our storage container. Well, it's good to see you guys this morning. Well, the cool thing about water is that in an area with no electricity, for us, we just tie it to a spigot for water. For electricity, it runs off a generator, but you might can plug it in. We could probably. Yeah, sure. Yeah. So then the question becomes just storing it and taking care of it when we're not using it. That was the other piece that I think would be important, is how to take care of it. But it's one of those things as a church, if you say, look, this is really important to us to minister both to the homeless here locally, but also to be able to throw it on the back of a truck, hitch it to the back of a truck and go spend a week somewhere helping a community that's gone through a disaster and using that as a means of supporting a local church in that neighborhood. That's where a lot of things happen, is they will set up in the parking lot of a local church. And so you've connected it to the ministry of the church too. And it makes it feel like it's a church-based, which it is, ministry to that local community. So that's what I think that's what we're really looking for. And we've done that before on some hurricane stuff, which I know you've been involved in. And when that one hit Corpus and then came up and hit Houston, we wound up working with a community between Corpus and Houston. That's where our church focused on. We went and cleared out down trees. Huh? League City. And then they had another one over in Galveston. Yeah. So things like that. Oh, that was for food. Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know, it's something to consider, because we've talked about it a lot, and we've done these kinds of support. I remember I got pulled over. I was driving the pool in the trailer, and apparently the plug for the lights on the back of the trailer weren't working. So it's like 6 a.m. I was trying to drive down and drive right back. I crashed in Austin for about 5 hours and jumped right back in the van and drove. I crashed at my brother's house or something, slept on his couch. And this cop pulled me over, and he asked me, where are you going? He goes, your lights are out. Where are you going? I told him. He goes, okay, look, the sun's going to come up here. Be really careful for the next little bit. He goes, how long is it going to take you to get home? And I told him. He goes, you should be okay. He was super nice to me, but he goes, the lights aren't working on the back of this trailer. He goes, I just don't want someone to run into you. He goes, and then he said to me, because I was down not far from where my destiny, he goes, but I do want you to know how much we appreciate you guys. So I got a chance to really, even just a police officer moment, to just go, hey, this is what our church is doing. We want to help out. And so even in that moment, I got pulled over because the lights weren't working, but I was thankful for it to be able to tell him, our church is, we've been praying for you guys. We're concerned down here. And he was super grateful. Those kinds of things just give you a place to have conversations and put forward what the church really should be as a ministering arm to the community at large, in addition to what we do within the walls of the church. So things like that give you other places to have those kinds of conversations. Well, it is good to see you guys this morning. We've been working through the book of Micah, and Kim and I have been reading through Isaiah. And it's interesting, the parallels. Not surprising, they're contemporaries of each other. Isaiah's writing in Jerusalem, in the capital city. He's more connected to the people in power and influence. Micah is a remote guy, down towards Lachish area, that kind of thing, but down toward the Mediterranean coast. And he's probably about 20 miles west of Jerusalem, down toward the Mediterranean coast, where he lives. He's a rural guy, farming, community kind of thing, ranching, lots of basic, just, rural type activities. And they're very different people, and they write to different groups of people. But the themes in both of them do resonate a bit, though, where the same issues that are happening in Lachish, to me, feel like they're imitating the stuff going on in Jerusalem. And that's how it wound up in Lachish, is it spread, right? And so when we see Micah today, the language today sounds more like Isaiah than other texts we've read from Micah so far. It's a little bit more like, ooh, that's the language I see in Isaiah. And so, and I mentioned to you, there's some direct quotes between the two that quote perfectly. And my theory is that Micah has picked up on Isaiah's prophecy and put it in his own, because it's so related to what he was talking about as well. Yeah. But anyway, so let's take a moment here and read. And we'll read the whole chapter this time, Micah 6. Last time we read 1 to 8. And we'll read the whole chapter this time. And he deals with, so thematically what he's going to deal with is, there's a lot of religious activity in Israel, or Judah. Israel's kind of almost gone at this point, but in Judah. And really over the top even at times. And yet behind the scene, he's going to go on and show, but all these other things are happening. That means that offering these sacrifices are kind of irrelevant because of the behavior. That this external religious stuff is not covering the heart issues that are really going on. All right, so here's what Micah says. Hear now what the Lord is saying. Arise, plead your case before the mountains, and let the hills hear your voice. Listen, you mountains, to the indictment of the Lord, and you enduring foundations of the earth, because the Lord has a case against his people, even Israel. So God is pleading his case, and he says, my people, what have you done? What have I done to you? And how have I wearied you? Answer me. Indeed, I brought you up from the land of Egypt and ransomed you from the house of slavery. I sent before you Moses, Aaron, and Miriam. My people, remember now what Balak the king of Moab counseled, and what Balaam son of Beor answered him. And I had Shittim to Gilgal, so that you might know the righteous acts of the Lord. With what shall I come before the Lord and bow myself before God on high? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings and yearly calves? Does the Lord take delight in thousands of rams and 10,000 rivers of oil? Shall I present my firstborn for righteous acts, the fruit of my body, for the sin of my soul? So here's the deal. God says, I've got a case against you. And he says to the mountains, oh mountains, hear my case against Israel. Right? And his case begins by saying this: what have I done to you? Why are you rebelling against me? I'm the one who brought you out of Egypt, out of slavery and bondage. I brought you into this land. I gave you these prophets. I provided all these things for you. And yet there's this rebellion. And in the middle of this presentation, Micah says, well, maybe we could assuage God in the midst of this court case. So you see God as a prosecuting attorney here, where he's presenting his case, right? And the judge in this case is the hills. He's going to present his case to the mountains. So he's a prosecuting attorney, and he goes, I'm bringing a case forward. And he says, they've turned their back on me, yet here's what I've done for them. I brought them out of Egypt. I gave them Moses, Aaron, and Miriam. I provided for their, all these things. And so now, before he gives the rest of his case, Micah's like, well, what if we got super religious? What if we got 1,000 rams and 10,000 rivers of oil, and we brought it all before the Lord? In fact, what if we went really extreme and offered our firstborn child or something like that? Which clearly God's not endorsing human sacrifice. I'm just saying, if you can think of the most extreme religious expression to assuage God. So God's like, I'm bringing this judgment against you as a prosecuting attorney. And they're like, all right, someone get the rams. Offer the rams to him. Someone get some oil, 10,000 rivers of oil. I'll tell you what, give him one of our kids. Give him the firstborn. Give him our eldest son. And maybe this will assuage the prosecuting attorney from judgment. And Micah says, actually, none of that would have any bearing on God's prosecutorial approach to you. Instead, he has told you, O man, what is good and what does the Lord require of you? To do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God. He's like, take the rams back out to the field. Keep the oil in its container. And certainly, protect your firstborn. But if you want the prosecution to stop, there's a real easy pathway to it. Do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with your God. All right, so we talked about that verse last week. It's very much a life verse. Love it. So then, now what we're going to get is the rest of the prosecution. Up to this point, God's just said, why are you rebelling against me based on all the things I've done? And there's a lull in the prosecution, and the people go, hey, I got an idea. Wow, he's mad. He did bring us up. I tell you what, let's assuage his anger. Let's offer all these things. And then verse 8, God says through Micah, actually, I don't want all that stuff that you're offering. That's irrelevant. It's all external, not internal. So this is what I want. So now he's going to turn to the rest of the prosecution. Not just because they turned their back on all the good things he's done. He's now going to turn his attention to, here's the things you have done, all right? The voice of the Lord will call to the city, and it is sound wisdom to fear your name. Hear, O tribe, who has appointed its time. Is there yet a man in the wicked house, along with the treasures of the wicked, and the short measure that is cursed? Okay, so now we're starting to get, here's what's going on, the short measure. The short measure. What are they measuring? Property, probably, right? They're measuring property. And they're like, yeah, I got your property. It's 10 acres. Like, looks more like 5 to me. So, yeah. And so the short measure. And then he says, can I justify wicked scales and a bag of deceptive weights? Right? So it's like, I've got the weights in this bag. And it's like, I think you pulled some out of there. Right? So he says, for the rich men of the city are full of violence. Her residents speak lies, and their tongue is deceitful in their mouth. So also I will make you sick, striking you down, desolating you because of your sins. You will eat, but you will not be satisfied, and your vileness will be in your midst. You will try to remove for safekeeping, but you will not preserve anything. And what you do preserve, I will give to the sword. You will sow, but you will not reap. You will tread the olive, but will not anoint yourself with oil, and the grapes, but you will not drink wine. The statutes of, now this is where this sounds a bit like Isaiah to me. The statutes of Omri. So now you got to know your Jewish history. Omri is one of the northern kingdom kings. He comes to power as a revolt against a prior dynasty. I think he rebels against Jeroboam, the original dynasty, but it may have been one after that. But I think it's the original one. Omri comes to power, and the house of Ahab is from the house of Omri. Omri, Ahab, I think Jehu may be in there too. I'm trying to remember. It seems like there may be like another couple of guys. But in their devices you walk. Therefore I will give you up for destruction and your inhabitants for derision, and you will bear the reproach of my people. Now, okay, so that's our text. All right, so the first thing we have here is the corruption that's taking place in terms of commerce. There's a lot of cheating of people here. People are absolutely ripping each other off. They're like, yeah, I measured to the end of the lot, and then, cutting it off, lying about it, all those kinds of things. And so we have some real estate corruption going on here. We have some commodities corruption going on here. They're like, you didn't give me 3 pounds of wheat. That's only 2 pounds. So I only owe you this, right? So there's a lot of corruption there. There's a lot of corruption. The guy that's doing the commodities trading is got his finger on the scale or something, it's not as much as And so, so there's a lot of corruption there. And this would be something like in our modern day, this would be something like, the state has to come out and check all the pumps at the gas stations. Because if you put 17 gallons in your car, that's what it says, but it turns out it was only 16 and a half because the pump isn't properly regulated, right? So the state comes out to test it because there's an easy way to rip people off. You go, wow, I thought I was I wasn't that close to empty. I guess I was really empty. He's like, that was a whole gallon more that I thought, I wasn't expecting that. It's like, well, it wasn't a whole gallon more. The guy has messed with that device, and now it's not producing as much gasoline as you thought. So they have to regulate these things. And prior to digital, I assume this was really a problem. Back when it was analog pumps, I suspect the potential to rip someone off even accidentally could happen, because those pumps were not always reliable. So it's that kind of thing. Someone intentionally going, you know what, I'm gonna have our gallons, instead of being a gallon per, it's gonna be about 0.9 of a gallon per gallon. And so it's like, oh, it's only $2.50 a gallon. You go, not quite. It's really, more like $2.70 a gallon because this person's been messing with the pump, right? And so this kind of deceptive thing, there's other places we might see this, right, where people are being deceptive in their business practices. We had a guy come give a quote. It was so funny. So we had a guy come give a quote to do a project at a house, the rental house we were trying to sell. And he came in with this guy, gave this whole presentation, just talked it up. But Lisa, my real estate agent, she couldn't find the guy anywhere. And she kept looking for references, and he said all these big projects, and he had these 2 guys with him. And she finally found this reference that someone had paid him, and he never paid him the half up front. He never showed up. And apparently this guy's just changing his name, but he puts this really good presentation on. And so you'll have some $5,000 remodel project. You give him, I got to buy supplies, we need a new tub, new sink, new vanity. That's what we needed. We had a bathroom that we had to gut completely to sell the house. Like it needed complete redo. And so he's like, yeah, just you give me $2,500. Y'all don't have to pay the rest until the end of the project. And the more she kept checking, she couldn't find any, stuff like that. My suspicion is this kind of thing. You're going to collect half of it, and you'd never find him again. And he's just doing this kind of thing over and over and over. And instead, we found this guy, Chuck, who's awesome. He built this, actually. And such a sweetheart of a guy. We found Chuck. And instead of smooth talking with Chuck, what you get from Chuck is he's like, this is how much I charge per hour. I think this will probably take about this, but I won't know until I start getting stuff pulled out. I'm pretty sure it'll take this. And every time he's told me that, he winds up billing me less. And I get the bill and go, that's $100 less than he said. Or $200. He's always like trying to make sure that he gives you some cushion so that he doesn't feel like he underbid it. So he's the opposite of these guys. I like my handyman, Chuck. Every time I ask him to do something, he'll give me a quote, and then he'll give me the final, and it's really reasonable, and then I get the final bill, and it's like, oh, he billed me, for these, I thought it was going to be a certain price, and he had to go back and do something again and fix it again. He goes, I wasn't expecting that, so I was like, oh, this price is getting big. He wanted to bill me $300 less than he originally quoted. It's like, okay, all right then. And so there's people like that, and then there's people who you can't trust. Probably everyone in this room has had a contractor rip them off. Yeah. Someone who told you one thing, and then it wound up not being the case. And so, yeah. So, yeah. Oh my goodness.
He was a preacher?
Yeah. Don't trust the preacher. Yeah. Well, if it's a construction project, you shouldn't trust this preacher either. As Joy, my mother-in-law, once said, Daniel preaches, he doesn't fix things. That's what she told someone once. Yeah. All right, so we have deceptive weights. The rich men are full of violence. So this now is, they're full of violence and lies. So these individuals are using both deception and violence in order to enrich themselves. And I think that's clearly the case because it says, for the rich men of the city are getting richer because of these things. So abuse of wealth, abuse of power and wealth. And so then 13 and 14, by the way, this clouds everything though, because then everyone's skeptical. I mean, you got to imagine this poor city of Lachish where someone says, well, I'll do it for this much, or I'll sell you the land for this much. Everyone in town is like, I don't know. Who can I trust? I don't know if I can trust anyone, right? And so you get burned by a contractor, and then you're like, okay, I don't trust anyone, right? And so this has created, I'm sure within the city of Lachish, the whole societal structure now is at risk. You have corrupt judges, you have corrupt contract bids, everyone's lying about stuff, real estate deals are there's some craftiness there. And so because of that, now the whole societal structure, which depends on a bit of honesty, a bit of, I'm trying to make money, but it's up front. I'm telling you, here's how I'm doing it. It's clear. And when this kind of deception starts happening, then all the fabric of the society will crumble and collapse. And I think we've seen that before. We've seen it at churches where churches, scandal breaks out in churches around the area, and then people in the community get skeptical of churches, like, oh, those churches are just ripping people off. They're lying, they're abusing people, and so then you have to deal with that as a church. So I can imagine for Lachish, they're dealing with this, and it's affecting everything. Every business transaction. Poor people feel just beaten down with life. They feel there's no justice. They feel mistreated, those kinds of things, right? And all of that is playing into this. So, all right, and so then from there, he says, you will sow, but you will not reap. So here's, I think, the final judgment from the prosecuting attorney is verses 15 and 16. So he's laid out his case. He makes his prosecutorial case. He says, I'm the God who brought you out of Egypt, gave you these great prophets, brought you into this land, and you respond when I start prosecutorial approach to you, you go, let's offer a bunch of animals. And he's like, I don't want that. I want your heart in the right place. And here's why the animals aren't going to help you. You can't offer 1,000 rams and then rip your neighbor off. Can't do it. I'm not listening. I'm not listening to this. I'm not accepting that as sacrifice. He goes, you can't come down and offer 1,000 rams and then tell your neighbor, I sold you 10 acres while selling them 5. You can't do it. And you can't do this and use violence to take someone's property or steal from them. You can't do that. You can't enrich yourself and go, well, I have 1,000 rams. Yeah, you stole all those, loser. And then you can't do that. And so what God says is all your efforts of trying to sow and reap, even in positive ways, will not come about. God's like, I'm not going to let you reap from this. You will tread on the olive, but will not be able to anoint. In other words, you won't get any oil out of the olive oil. You'll have these grapes. You won't get anything to drink from the wine press. And so that's the irony to all this, is that they've done these things to enrich themselves, and God says, I'm, as the prosecuting attorney here and as the God of the universe and as the one who brought you out of Egypt, I'm not letting you get away with it. And so that's basically what the statement is here. I think all of us have probably been frustrated at times of individuals who maybe ripped us off or ripped other people off and they appear to get away with it, right? Feel frustrated over that. Feel like, wow, that was super corrupt and they're never going to answer for this. I think if you're in Lachish, there's probably a feeling like that. If you're the poor, you feel like, man, these guys are all enriching themselves. And what happens, of course, is that not long after this prophecy, Assyria comes and they lose everything. They lose it all. The olives trees probably burned them all to the ground. The grapes, I mean, they went scorched earth on them, I'm sure. And they just completely destroy them. And the farmland completely destroyed. So I think what he's talking about here is you're gonna sow, you're gonna have these olives you want to pull in, you got these grapes, you're gonna make the olive oil, but you'll never get a chance to anoint your head. You're gonna have the grapes growing, but you'll never get a chance to make wine. And I think the reason for that is this judgment from Assyria is about to sweep in and destroy all of that. So it's like, well, I got extra land because I ripped this person off with the real estate measurement, and Micah's like, God's like, yeah, you won't have any of that. Like, I got this extra land, and I look at these olive trees I've got, and the grapes I've got planted, and God's like, yeah, that's all going away. And you're like, look at the grain we planted. I can't wait till we harvest that. And God's like, the Assyrians are going to burn this to the ground. And so you did all this with corruption, and you're looking out at the work going, man, we've really made it. And God, as the prosecuting attorney, says, no, you haven't. And probably these are individuals who are probably still occasionally going to the temple and offering sacrifices at feasts and stuff, which is why he says, even if you offered 1,000 rams, I'm not listening to you. Because they might be going, well, we have assuaged God and any other random deities that we idolatrously worship, so we should be fine here. And so, yeah. And that's why I think verse 16 is so significant, because of the history and the history of these individuals named here. This anchors Micah's text in 8th century BC, which is nice. This is a strong historical reference. Ahab comes to power about probably almost 900 BC, somewhere between 900 and 850. Jehu is 840 or something like that. I think that's his grandson. It may be his grandson. But anyway, he's a couple of kings after him. But the Omri dynasty takes over. They are wealthy. They are killing it. In fact, the palace in the Omri dynasty is described as being laced in all pearls. And so they have this, a very ornate kingdom. They're very wealthy. Omri's wealthy. Ahab was very wealthy. And they've gotten their wealth. Remember the story of Ahab. Why would Ahab be a great example in the midst of all this? When it comes to planting vineyards and getting wealthy. Remember that? Naboth's vineyard? He steals Naboth's vineyard. And that moment of stealing the vineyard from this poor guy, remember that? Jezebel wanted that. It was close to her house. Get that for me. So they kill this poor guy, take his land, right? Same kind of corruption that's going on now with Micah. And the reason he brings this up is by now the Omri dynasty has fallen. The northern kingdom's almost non-existent completely. The kingdom that is there is just a vassal state of the Assyrians, and it's all about to completely collapse. And so if they go, if I think his point is, you're imitating Ahab, you're imitating Omri using power and violence and deception and idolatry and all these kinds of things to get rich and get wealthy. And you have this sense of, I'm fine, I'm good, I'm safe. This thing's worked out for me. And if you think about what happened with Ahab, though, it was the vineyard stealing that was the final straw where God brings judgment on him, right? Jezebel and him both die not too much longer after that. But it's indicative of the things that are now taking place in Lachish, where Micah is. And that's why he brings them up. Because if you knew your history, you would say, as a comparison, I'm trying to think of a good comparison. Well, you might say, like the former Soviet Union. Say, oh, wait, that thing collapsed, right? Or you might say, like the Berlin Wall. You guys are like the Berlin Wall, 1989. You go, ooh, wait a minute. I think they took sledgehammers to that thing. And so it's that kind of historical reference where Micah is pulling from this historical event saying, you're acting like these individuals with the same confidence as them, and they collapse completely, and the same thing is going to happen here. And so this is, I think this is where Micah's draw is from, is that he's comparing them with them. All right, comments or questions? Yes, when? Hmm. Oh, that's a fair point. He does bring up Moses and the bondage in Egypt. Right, yeah. He does warn him about Babylon. We had that discussion last week about, or maybe it was 2 weeks ago, Babylon comes up in this text, and someone's like, it may have been you, it's like, does he know Babylon's coming and that whole thing, right? And Babylon at this point, I think we talked about this, at this point they've been fighting with the Assyrians now for a long time. And the Assyrians had generally been getting the upper hand, but they had won a few times against the Assyrians. But generally, but they were growing in their influence. And apparently, God reveals to Micah, the Assyrians is not going to be the final destruction of this group, but the Babylonians is the place where captivity is going to come. And we talked about that, but especially in light of Moses and the Exodus, that makes complete sense that God would tell Micah what happened in the Exodus is going to have to happen again because of this kind of behavior. And it's going to come by the Babylonians, though, not the Assyrians. Yeah. Yeah. Sure. Which he promises, of course, in Micah 5 with the messianic language, which is the same thing throughout Isaiah. There's this same repeated theme throughout Isaiah, is that there's just trouble, disaster, but there's this the servant, my servant, or the promised child. There's layered throughout Isaiah is this constant theme of there will be a remnant and my servant is coming. This promised child is coming. Virgin will conceive, right? All these kinds of things. So there's this hopeful promise in the midst of trouble everywhere. And Isaiah is very much like that. And Isaiah winds up with more explicit on Babylon because he confronts Hezekiah on showing the Babylonians all the gold and tells Hezekiah, those Babylonians are going to come back and get all this. But it's very similar as Micah in that Micah gets this brief glimpse of a messianic figure who's going to come, and that's where this can be fixed. But yeah, everything else is somewhat frustrating and hopeless. You can feel, like you said, Micah's frustration throughout. Yeah. Kim will say this to me. So we read a chapter tonight in Isaiah, and she'll say something like, all right, is this going to be a hopeful Isaiah chapter or a sad one? And I go, I don't know. And sometimes you'll read it and it's half and half. I think the one we read last night, the first half was like super hopeful. And then at the end, he goes back to all this hopeful stuff I just said. This generation won't experience it because you're doing all of this stuff. And she's like, oh man, we do this every night where like we'll read it and go, oh, that one was pretty hopeful, like Isaiah 40. That was all hopeful. We're good. But then there's times you read them and just go, oh, this is all bad. It's just bad news. And so, but Micah spends most of his time on the bad side of the equation. Isaiah does too in the first 39 chapters. 40 through 66, in fact, that's one thing that Kim and I were reading, we're talking about. There's a shift takes place at Isaiah 40 where you start to get this prevailing hopefulness in the midst of all this calamity. But Micah mostly stays in the calamity world. So. Oh, and I think it's interesting. By the time we're done with Micah, just like Revelation, we read every verse of the book of Revelation out loud in here. And by the time we're done with Micah, we'll have read every verse from the book of Micah out loud in here. And so if, and then we'll not do that with Isaiah. There's no way. It's the longest book of the Bible. There's no way we're doing line by line, verse by verse through every single chapter of Isaiah. We'll do a lot of it, but I don't think we'll read all 66 chapters of Isaiah. That would think how long Revelation took? Quadruple that. I mean, Isaiah is really, really long. But there's going to be sometimes I take 3 or 4 chapters and kind of go, here are the main ideas, and we'll read parts of it. But we'll read a good chunk of Isaiah as well. But we read every verse of Revelation out loud. When we study the book of John, we read every verse of John out loud. The book of Galatians, we'll read every verse of Galatians out loud, most of them more than once. So the idea of be committed to the public reading of the scripture, remember that's what Paul told Timothy? So that's what we do. Read it out loud. But then while we're doing it, then we start going, okay, what are we gleaning from this? What are we learning? And like Wynn just pointed out, Micah I think it's a sad statement, is that there's such clear evidence, but they're just abusing their power and their wealth and ignoring the signs all around them of impending trouble. And they think they've gotten away with it. And he points to this in this last verse, I think is really significant because he points to the example of Ahab and goes, you're acting like Ahab here. Speaking of patterns, repeated patterns, like you said. He's like, you're acting like Ahab here, and that ended poorly. Ahab and Jezebel have already been killed by this point, and they lost all their wealth. That whole dynasty collapsed. There's nothing left of them. And he's saying, you're acting like Ahab right now, abusing your power, abusing your influence, and abusing your wealth, stealing other people's stuff, and you think you've gotten away with it. And the same thing that happened with Ahab, I'm going to do with you. It's almost as if God says, you think I'm going to let Ahab do what he did and bring judgment to him, but let you get away with it? That ain't happening. So, all right, so application. Well, don't be moving property lines at your house. Okay? Don't do that. Yeah. You can put a new fence in. Don't move it over 4 feet. And then your neighbor's confused as to why their backyard's smaller. Don't do that kind of thing, okay? Don't do that. You get in trouble for that, and you should. Don't rip people off. Don't rip people off, Better off being broke than ripping someone off. So don't rip people off. Have integrity. Walk in integrity. But I think the real message from all this is something more basic than that, which is that the relationship with God is one of the heart, not external religious expression. And so they're like, how about 1,000 animals? And he's like, how about your heart? This is what God requires of you. See, the 1,000 lambs can be offered and your heart be totally disengaged. Like, just bring the next animal, slit the throat. Bring the next animal, slit the throat. And the heart can be totally disengaged in this. And just like the heart can be totally disengaged in coming on Sunday mornings to Matthew Road. You can be here, we can be here, and yet our heart's not engaged. And this verse reminded me a little bit of Romans 12:1. He says, therefore I urge you, brethren, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies a living and holy sacrifice acceptable to God, which is your spiritual service of worship. In other words, if you're looking for a way to offer sacrifices to God and worship him, give him your life. And I think this is basically what Micah heard too. It's like, how does a Christian really worship God? And Paul's like, well, you offer yourself to him. Just give him yourself. Your life is your act of worship. And don't reduce worship to songs on a Sunday morning or what you listen to on the radio between commutes. But our life is the act of worship. In Micah's case, they're trying to reduce it to some kind of religious expression while keeping their life for themselves. And it ends in disaster. So, all right, well, we are now ready to move to, I think we got 2 more chapters in Micah, right? 7 and 8. So we'll tackle chapter 7. I think it's going to take 3 more weeks, probably, maybe 4. We're moving pretty quickly. This is week 12, and so we're doing about half a chapter a week. That's pretty good pace, and about right for, I think, Old Testament prophets like this. It'd be too fast for Romans if you said, we're doing half a chapter a week. I'd be like, no, you're not. But for Micah, I think it works well. And so, probably 3, maybe 4 more weeks of Micah, and then we'll start in the book of Isaiah. Yeah. All right. Well, let's pray. God, thank you for this time to just think through the prophet Micah's words, and also, Lord, to take a moment just to ask that you would be gracious and reveal to us places in our heart that mimics or imitates some of the heart issues of Micah's own day. And Lord, I know it's a different time, different space, different people, but Lord, there's so much of the human condition we see here that is prevalent there, is also prevalent in our own day. Lord, I pray you would help us, guard us from mere external obeisance while not engaging the heart. So Lord, we lay our lives before you as living sacrifices, as a holy and acceptable sacrifice in your eyes. And Father, please guard us from reducing our relationship to you to something that can be done without the mind and heart engaged. We pray